Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 706. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. This week, we feature a conversation with Tom Henricksen. Tom makes a strong case that ignoring soft skills will limit your ability to deliver real value. Tom says humans are hard, code is easy. Tom Henricksen is a problem-solving technology professional. He has worked in various roles in technology for over 20 years. Tom has learned to solve challenging problems in technology and lead technical teams. He can help you develop those skills too. Check him out at codeiseasy.co. Tom Henricksen, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thanks, Tom. Always good to be talking with you.
Tom, it has been a pleasure, and we've talked many times over the years, and now we're talking to the Tom Henricksen from codeiseasy.co. It's a brand new world.
Yes, it is. It is, Tom. It's an important thing that we need to learn lessons, and we kind of have to listen to ourselves. And I had to learn a lesson and listen to myself and a lot of our Agile friends about reducing my work in process. So we've talked before about the Agile Online Summit and the DevOps Online Summit, and I've stepped back from both of those, and I had to reduce my work in progress because I also have a full-time job and a family as well. So I stepped back and I've been focusing in on speaking about, as a developer, which is my background, is the importance of those human and soft skills, I guess, depending on who you talk to. Some people use different terminology, but it's so important to really learn about how we, really can influence and communicate and how important those relationships are in our lives. So that's kind of what I've been focusing in on, speaking to lots of different groups about this.
Before we dive into that, and by the way, I'm glad you didn't limit your WIP in other ways, like, yeah. And we both probably know people who limit their WIP exactly the wrong way, at least in our opinion.
Yeah.
Human skills, soft skills.
Yep.
Let's define that. And are they the same thing?
Good question. Yeah, that's a good question. I guess what I try to focus in mostly is around like communication and relationships and influence. That's what I focus in on. I think when people say soft skills, sometimes they're using different things that might fall under that maybe are similar to those, or and that's one of the things I think the human skills. For instance, we talk a little bit about, or we used to talk like on DevOps, and I know you're probably familiar, and your listeners might be familiar with the DevOps Institute. They will often talk about human skills, or the humans of DevOps is kind of one of their taglines, and I think that's one of the things where I see various people use that. Another thing I've heard people talk about, like the T-shaped individual. They might be deep in one area, but broad in the other. Usually, what they're implying there is they're broad in some of those soft skills that people, have. And really, I guess to me, and I tell a lot of stories when I speak, Tom. So pardon me if I tell a lot of stories here on your great podcast, but I learned this, from myself, but too, there was a developer, and I talk about this developer in the speech that I give a lot, and it really resonates with people. But essentially what this developer did, they came to me, and this was one of my first time I was a manager, and they came to me and they said, Tom, if you could just email me all the requirements and I didn't have to come to any of the meetings, that would be great. And it was one of those where I was like, yeah. And it's interesting because as I give this speech to a lot of groups, Tom, a lot of people have had people like this,
a lot of people still do that.
Yeah. And then they wonder why, and this is, like we have talked before about this Agile community and all these people in the Agile space, and what they want us all to do is have a conversation. And I think that's where a lot of people who are, like myself, technical minded, they want to just, they might gravitate to their work, because at the end of the day, a lot of them, and I am an introvert, but a lot of us can be that way, but we need to develop these soft skills, because what I've seen, Tom, a lot of times these people have great, technical skills. They might be a great developer. They might be a great DBA, or, whatever, that they focus on these and think that's how to get ahead. But they forget about, I have to get along with, the other Tom and these other people in the organization. to be able to to influence and to get ideas heard and to get ahead. Because I've seen a lot of people, you've probably seen this too, Tom, people where they're really strong, maybe technically or something that minded, but they'll hit a ceiling in their career and they won't get any further, and they wonder why. And sometimes those people can get very bitter and very angry, and that's not a good thing. But that's why I try to bring this soft skills topic up.
Soft skills are important. Well, at least the relationships, the communications, those sorts of things, having influence or at least understanding influence might be important.
Yeah.
I think time accounting ends up being thrown into soft skills, or managing your WIP might be a soft skill per se. And maybe that's important too. I think they probably have to realize it first. And so how do you reach somebody who's, I love doing the math, I love building algorithms, I love doing the code, leave me alone. I'll of course go to the top over that. How do you get that in their head that is not the right answer, that there has to be some degree of balance?
Yeah. I think one of the things, and it's, that kind of goes back to the influence that, we talk about with soft skills, is how we come about it. I mean, I think you've probably seen people try to do this too, that they use their position as influence and say, well, I am so-and-so, so you have to do this because I said so. It's kind of,
you mean
you've probably done this as a parent. Exactly. But I think what you have to do at the end of the day is kind of build that relationship with them to understand what makes them tick. So for instance, this is something, I find, I don't have a story about this in my speech, Tom, honestly, but I find this question comes up a lot. And there's a question about how do you get to people like this, like kind of what you're asking. And I always bring up this story. And in this speech, I talk about this guy named John. And I basically worked with him to kind of help his team. He had a technical team that was really struggling. He had one individual on this team, and his name was Joseph, and we called him the processor, because he could process things if you gave him information ahead of time. But if you came say you, Tom, came to his desk and said, hey, I want you to do that, Joseph would shut down. But what we found is if you were going to have a meeting with Joseph, maybe tomorrow or the next day, if you gave him a day or so to think about it, he would be fine. And so what you will find a lot of times, and I've had people work with me like this. So I used to be, a long time ago, I was a scrum master. And I remember I had somebody on my team that was like this. And if you threw him into a sprint planning meeting and he was just like flustered, he didn't know what was coming up. If you brought something that wasn't like sent a day before, he would shut down. So you kind of need to understand, how does that person approach things, and why don't they like being in these meetings, or like you said, maybe in the code, what does that feeling give them? So if you can understand and relate to them and kind of help themselves, I think that's where you can really get to those people. If you build that relationship and understand them, where they struggle, because it's not like we have one answer, but where you can relate to them.
Well, I'll play the devil's advocate for a second. So we have somebody on our team that's like that shuts down when something new's thrown in.
Yep.
Why can't we find them a different team?
Good question. Yeah, I guess that would depend on, and maybe you have that ability to put somebody on a different team. But my guess is every team's going to have that to some degree. I think part of that too, and this is another, so you bring up a good point there, having people on the right team and maybe struggling with what I've seen this too. You've probably seen it too a bit on various teams, but there might be certain people that might always butt heads. And it might not be so much that, hey, it's so-and-so never wants to change. It's that, this person always brings up the idea and is like right in their face. Sometimes people want to be right in their face and be real confrontational, and other people will shut down. They don't like that. So I think part of that too is understanding the team dynamics as well.
Well, I think there's team dynamics, and I think there's team dynamics. So in the first case, right, with the person who shuts down, that's obviously a different thought process, thought style. I think most teams that are get a little overly excited about only having one thought process on a team have a propensity to be far less intellectually diverse than they really need to be to solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
arguably, right, the people that butt heads, that may not be something that you want to lead, or I almost said manage around, but lead around, right? That's as a leader, that may end up being close to the unacceptable list.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How did you get here? I mean, Tom, you were, as we started this conversation, you were doing everything. You were summits. You were
Yep.
doing stuff with Vasco Duarte. You were doing stuff over here. You were a perpetual motion machine. What took you down the path of actually recognizing A, you had to limit WIP, and B, that we all needed a little help with this human skills?
Yeah, I think as I looked at what things kind of lit me up, where I was enjoying myself and wanted to be spending, because at the end of the day, I wanted to feel, like I was passionate for what I was doing. And I think that was part of it too, is, I had done things like, I did the summit for 5 years, talked to a lot of great people, and then, it was one of those things as I made that shift and realized this is something where I feel like I can make a difference in, and I feel like this is a message I can take to a lot of people. And, as I've talked to various groups, it's been very receptive. So I had a goal last year, 2021, to speak 20 times before, September something or other. But my goal is to speak at least 20 times during the year. So I was able to speak 25 times to various different groups. And it was one of those things where I could see it was really resonating, and I've gotten a lot of good feedback about it. So it's one of those things where it fits in a lot of different areas. And it's a message, I think, that a lot of people, it's funny. Sometimes people will ask me this question, like, the people that need this are the developers. So for instance, like if I talk to a group of BAs, I've talked to a lot of IIBA chapters and they'll say the developers need to hear this. And it's like, that's true. But, I have to go where people are willing to listen. So, but it's one of those things as I talk more and share it with wider audience, it does get out, and it's fun to see, people connect and the questions they ask and see the realizations they have.
I think I've always been struck when somebody says, "Hey, that group over there needs it." That probably they're deflecting, and that perhaps the reason you got hired to talk was that they actually needed it too, and maybe that's really what they're trying to say. Mm-hmm. How does this progress? How does someone actually get better at having human skills? And I actually, the more you talked about whether it's calling it soft skills or human skills, I like the idea of it being called human skills, because what are we learning to be but humans, not soft necessarily.
Yeah, that's true. We definitely need to think about, how we can relate better to other humans, and kind of on your point earlier where you're talking about the groups. As I talk to various groups, they will talk to different things. So like I said, like for instance, I've talked to quality assurance groups, and they will find where they focus on, maybe where I'll say code, they might focus on the testing they do, as opposed to, we need to make sure our testing aligns with what the business wants, because sometimes, we can all do this. Developers can do this. They can assume this is what you want, and then they take it to the business person and they're like, no, actually, you're missing the mark. BAs, I've talked to BAs, they'll say the same thing. Sometimes they'll think, this is what the business wants. And then they'll talk to the business, and the business will say, well, actually, I needed to do this. And it's just those conversations, that communication where we can kind of check ourselves. It's kind of, we hear that term test-driven development. It's like test-driven conversations. Well, Tom, I think you mean this. And then you can say, well, Tom, I think you're off and you really need to do that,
Well, it's funny. In Agile conversations, Squirrel and Frederick actually use test-driven development as a communication tool, test-driven TDD for humans. Arguably, right? And it's funny. I was working and teaching a team today and ended up on the topic of the 3 C's. Remember, card, conversation, and confirmation. And in reality, that middle C, right, that communication piece requires being able to have that conversation. We've banged on about this for 20 years in the Agile community.
Yeah.
Are we making progress, or is what you're doing that step away from let's teach Scrum, let's transform Agile? Is this the right step away to actually have a more significant impact in organizations?
Yeah. I think, it's funny you bring that up. So I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking to this person. Now, we have these conversations, as you mentioned, in the Agile space that, and I heard Bob Galen talk about this once, but if you're for instance, if you're a safe person, your solution is always going to be safe. If you're a Scrum person, your solution is always going to be Scrum. I heard somebody talk about this, and this person was talking about a therapist and their type of therapy framework, which I'm not really conversant in that framework or in that world, but it sounded so similar to how we say, if you get an Agile coach and they're really just certified in, just to pick something safe, that their solution is going to be, everybody here needs to learn about safe. And that how we need to really kind of, like you said, we need to kind of step back and make sure, are we helping people out? Is there value? And then two, are we communicating it properly and influencing who we need to influence?
The speech that you started your transition with, is it the same speech as today?
That's a good question, Tom. What I did, so I actually went through some training with a company called Heroic Public Speaking, and they help you craft a speech, but they also help you kind of learn how to adapt the speech. And it's been interesting how it's morphed. Like the process of writing a speech, much like I know you've written a lot of books, Tom. You probably see this where you create something, but then you have editors and people look at it, and you have people that will read it and give you feedback. You might have some, a few people. The same thing goes for this process with the speech, is that you create it, and they have somebody help you write it. But then you have to start taking that speech and you start, you speak it, because for instance, you might write a speech and then you start saying it. You're like, that doesn't come off right.
Yeah, I can't. Those words don't come out of my mouth well.
Yes. So yeah, that's the whole part of it, is that it has morphed. So like I said, I gave it a lot last year, but it's been changing ever since. And I'm even still currently working with this group at Heroic Public Speaking. I'm going through some additional things that we're doing. I'm actually going to go there. It's in Lambertville, New Jersey, which isn't very far from my house. It's just part to learn more how to, phrase things and to get feedback. Like I said, I wrote this from the mindset of a developer, but then as I've talked about, I've talked to different groups like business analyst groups, Agile groups, project management groups, Agile groups. They kind of inform me in how to make it, maybe to give it a different perspective and to, really help kind of hone it. So it does apply better to everyone.
From the point of view of code is easy, where do you see code is easy going?
Yeah, I think what the goal of this is as I talk to different organizations, is to kind of help, share this message, but then to help organizations as they go forward. For instance, just not just sharing the message, but then too, maybe it's a workshop or something, helping people. Like I said, I've helped different organizations with this, and as it resonates and it informs, to kind of share that out and help organizations to kind of, like we were talking about earlier, not just say, for instance, like in the Agile space, we want to be Agile, but to help people understand how they can work together, better together, and have those conversations.
Where do you anticipate this going?
What I look forward to see is I want to share this message with more organizations, and to share, help them kind of move things forward, that step. For instance, I've talked to a couple different groups where I've talked to, like there's a friend of mine who had me come in and talk to his development team. And we had some conversations. This is kind of one of those things where we can have the speech, but it's really a conversation starter. Because at the end of the day, I like to share this, but have a conversation with the people in the room to help them kind of get things move forward for them, to maybe find that better collaboration, to help build the relationships better so those teams gel. Because, at the end of the day, we want to help, those teams move forward and really use those human skills or soft skills, as we talked about, to do that.
I don't think I'll ever use soft skills again. I really like the idea of helping to shape humans. I think that's, I don't know. That resonates a whole lot with me. Tom, if you woke up tomorrow morning, someone handed you your morning caffeinated beverage of choice and a magic wand and said you had 2 wishes that you could use to shape how people create relationships, how they communicate, how they leverage influence. What would those 2 things be and why?
I think the first thing that comes to mind, Tom, is really empathy. I think it's important to have empathy for people because, like I mentioned before, like in the speech and other people I've talked to, there's people out there. For instance, it might be a developer, or they might be, it might be somebody who works on your team that's a tester, or that, there's a lot of people out there that maybe are introverted or don't want to converse as much. And we might think, oh, there's something wrong with so-and-so. But I think if we have an empathy first and start to have that be our starting point, but then take that to a conversation to understand what are they struggling with? Because a lot of times, people might be struggling with certain things, especially now. I think you've probably seen this where, mental health has become a big thing. And I think it's important for us to understand how people are dealing with, for instance, like as we kind of are talking now, we're kind of coming out of this pandemic. This is still affecting a lot of people. And I think we need to, if we start with that empathy and then transition to that conversation, we get a better understanding. And that's where, we can really help people.
Heck, we're coming out of the pandemic and jumping right into the whole world's on fire.
Yes. Yes.
Stress ain't going down. Absolutely.
Correct. Yep. I couldn't agree more. Yes.
Amazing. Tom, if people wanted to reach out, they wanted to get Tom Henricksen to talk to them, to hear about why code is easy, humans are hard, kind of a concept.
Yeah.
How would they go about doing that?
Yeah. The best place to do that is at codeiseasy.co. So that's codeiseasy.co. You can go there. That's my website. And I have, a lot of information there, how to contact me. But yeah, that's I think the best starting point. And I've been, talking to various different groups. I have quite a few scheduled, in the next couple of weeks. I'm actually going to be speaking at an event in Australia, although virtually. But, that's one of the things. And it's funny, as you think about, as we're coming out, still there's, a lot of organizations and events are starting to do things in person, but still there's a lot of virtual stuff out there. So, that's one of the things but I think that's probably the best way to get in touch with me.
Super. I think we'll have that in there. So Tom, as you know, at the end here, we open up the platform for you to promote anything that you like. Tom, thank you for educating me, changing my vocabulary, something that I think is actually much harder than people would expect. Platform's yours, sir.
Well, I just appreciate, having me on here, Tom. I appreciate you letting me share this with people. I think as far as promoting anything, I think I would promote you. I just appreciate all that you do. And you've been doing this for, I know, many years, and you continue to do it. And I think it's a great service that you do to your listeners, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, sir. And this will be running in the middle of year 16. So it has been a little while. Again, Tom, thank you very much. Any chance that you'll be in Nashville for Agile 2022?
Not currently. So, but we'll see. Potentially. you can never rule out anything.
Tom, thank you very much for lending your voice to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Well, thank you, Tom. I always enjoy the conversation. It's so good to talk with you.
In Reread Saturday News, the bottom line to Chapter 10, Why Limit WIP? We Are Drowning in Work, is simple. Assuming you've been reading along. Too much WIP interferes with learning. Without the time or inclination to experiment, the best scenario is learning by accident. In Chapter 10, the author discusses how knowledge workers learn. Remember, buy a copy, read along, link in the show notes to this installment of Reread Saturday and all others. We're at the final weekend of the poll for the next one. The top 3 books have been stable for about a week, but there's still time to contribute to the race. Link in the show notes. In the SPaMCAST, it's back to flow basics with a discussion of the attributes of flow. Scott Ambler described 2 attributes of flow as smoothness and scent. We will discuss. We'll also have a visit from Susan Parente, who will bring her Not a Scrundamentalist column to the podcast. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?